distortion of electoral processes, incitements to violence, dangerous conspiracy theories. We all know what disinformation is. False information that is created and spread deliberately or otherwise to harm people, institutions and interests. It's one of the major concerns of democratic countries. Behind false news or fake news, strategies are often articulated to manipulate public opinion and erode the stability of states and their institutions. Hoaxes and disinformation have long been a global threat to freedom and democracy, but the development and widespread use of digital media allow for it to spread even more quickly, making disinformation a more pressing problem. My name is Evi Kiorri, and this is Communicating Democracy, the EuroPCom podcast on public communication. With me today I have Guillaume Kuster, co-founder and CEO of Check First. Guillaume, welcome and thank you for joining us today to our podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So how can we do that? How can we detect and respond to disinformation?
It's tricky, isn't it? It's one of the main societal problems, I think, today, because information is shaping opinions. And we come from a world where the media basically told us what we needed to know. And we all, maybe even if we didn't have all the same opinions, we had the same fact base on which to build these opinions. And today, this is not the case anymore. Your Facebook feed is not like my Facebook feed, or same applies to YouTube, TikTok. There's a generational thing here. So the question is, detection is quite tricky because everybody has a personally curated feed of stuff coming at them, in which only them have a view. Them and the platforms. But, other stakeholders are not in the mix. Regulators are not in the mix until the DSA, Digital Services Act, applies, and we are big supporters of that, and we really hope that it will change the perspective of a lot of actors in the sector to better understand how information flows. Until that exists and is applied in full force, there is no real way to know how information is spreading. Nobody knows how algorithms works, and nobody knows how content recommendational algorithms work, which is the main problem. When I'm looking, for a search term, say on YouTube, I will get results, okay, but why will I get these results? So detection, the way we see things at Check First is we do simulate users and collect as much data as we can from different geographies to have an idea of what types of content are presented to the users. But we cannot do that times 450 million Europeans. So, it's one window into this world. We think it's better than just trying it for yourself, manually. We can automate that and do it a lot of times and try to see narratives that we wouldn't see otherwise. So as regards detection of disinformation or foreign influence operations or even scams, that's one way to look at it, among others.
And you mentioned DSA and the regulations that the EU is trying to introduce. But what are the key communication tools in the fight against disinformation and the approaches? What approaches can we take?
Starting the development and teaching of critical thinking at school. I live in Finland, we're based in Finland, and we're really happy to be in a country where the school system acknowledged that. And also because kids get 3 things when they're 7 years of age: a transportation card for the bus, they get a credit card to buy stuff, and they get a smartphone at 7. So that means that they become digital citizens very early on in life, and that we need to teach them how to navigate that. What is, a little bit better to look at is to see that young Finns, if you look at the OECD figures, are more resilient to disinformation, probably because school has been teaching them how to be critical, to think critically, and to ask themselves the question, okay, that piece of information looks bizarre? Who's the source? Why would someone write something like that? And to have that thought process done, unfortunately, that unfortunately is not existent in other countries.
Mm-hmm. And we will hope that will be the case for the rest of the European countries. But let's break it down for our listeners a little bit. What would you say is disinformation?
Defining disinformation appeals another question, which is what is truth? And that's a much more difficult question. So I'll start with disinformation. The answer is quite easy. It's anything that is not true. It's purposefully or accidentally reporting facts or conveying ideas about facts that are baseless. So hopefully, the Enlightenment equipped us as a society with the scientific method, but it takes time. It's sometimes contested even. People get trapped into thought bubbles when they find communities that they didn't know exist and in which they feel comfortable and they are recognized. So disinformation, it's all things untrue, but there are many different ways to look at who is producing disinformation and to which effect. Foreign influence operations, of course. We've been talking about that since even before the unfolding of the war in Ukraine. And we know that the Russian Federation has always been an expert into disinformation operations, but they existed well before social media. But the same techniques are used, but this time with an unprecedented scale and reach that is very concerning.
But what contributes to the spread of disinformation?
That's one of our major grids today is the role of the big platforms and the very large online platforms that they are labeled in the DSA, because they all created technical ways to feed people with as personalized content as possible, just in order to sell ads to them, because people buying ads do want to speak to a very tiny fragment of the audience, those that are most susceptible to buy their products. So that's the drive. The drive for the platforms was to know the users as much as possible and to serve content that will basically be a filler in between the ads and achieve that goal of bringing cash into and ad money into the platforms' bank accounts. So driving disinformation, I think it's an accident that the algorithms are driving or helping the spread of disinformation. We saw, for instance, during a project of ours, Crossover, that was funded by the EU, that the Chinese state government immediately replaced RT after its ban at the beginning of the war in between Russia and Ukraine, where there was no content to consume for the people that used to like RT and Sputnik content, and the algorithm freaked out and just served them another state-controlled media outlet, which was CGTN, China Global Television Network, with also, arguable coverage of the war. So we don't think that is something that Google, YouTube, Meta, and others are doing on purpose, because the algorithms are just doing what they were designed to do, to keep the users for as long as possible on the platform so that they can consume ads. But in the case of, people at the verge of society or questioning the news or being distrustful with the media, they also give signals to the algorithms. I don't want to consume traditional media. I want to consume that content that I like, which is a little bit conspirationist, which is a little bit alternative. So the algorithm is just doing that. It's trying to find among the corpus of content existing something that would suit them. And that's the problem, which is the platforms are not being held accountable for that. And hopefully the DSA will help address that through independent audits, and where, we will be able as auditors to ask and to obtain from the platforms and any relevant piece of data, including how the algorithms work.
And how can the networks take accountability? What can they do to combat disinformation?
I think there were some efforts being made by the platforms to build trust and safety teams and trying to moderate the content. They tried first and foremost to stay away from content moderation, any kind of accountability or responsibility for the content, saying we just provide the pipe and the users are doing the content. There's the legendary Section 230 in the US that isolates them from that. It's a little bit different on other markets. What they can do, the fundamental question is content moderation and preventing disinformation is not compatible with their goals, capitalistic goals. So they need to spend money. They need to have a cost by having these trust and safety teams and moderators, etc. So that's an expense they have to take in order to continue to operate. And their incentive is to have that expense to be as low as possible. And that's also why probably we saw Meta, using third parties and having actual human beings looking at the worst possible content online and having them make the decisions, should it go through or not, which leads to an array of, psychological issues and horrible situations for these people. Maybe AI someday will help with content moderation. So the incentives are not aligned for platforms to moderate the content and to bar disinformation from being present. And also there is a fundamental, difference in the way most platforms, which are American and us Europeans, see the question of free speech. So that's another thing also. Philosophically, it's very different. We deem completely unacceptable to be on the street with a Nazi flag. It's fine in the US. It's permitted. So that's also something that needs to be considered culturally. They don't come from the same standpoint than us.
Mm-hmm. And any concluding thoughts very quickly?
I think we have great hope that the DSA will change the situation, and we know that the European market and its nearly 500 million people are important for the platforms, and that they will comply with the rules of the DSA. So we are curious and willing to be active into that auditing role that is set up by the regulation, to take, to make sure that these platforms are held accountable and that researchers and independent auditors can understand the system and recommend or point at solutions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Guillaume, for sharing your insights on detecting disinformation. And to our listeners, we hope you enjoyed this episode of Communicating Democracy. And if you want to discover more about the link between democracy and technology, check out our EuroPCom podcast series. And of course, if you like this episode, feel free to share it with your network. Thank you very much for tuning in. And until next time. This is a podcast series of the European Committee of the Regions. For more information on EuroPCom, please visit the website core.europa.eu.